workplaces are now more diverse than ever before, and we will continue to see that trajectory get more and more intense. So what does this mean for organizations? If we buy this idea that workforces are diversifying even further and that workplace diversity is becoming increasingly the norm, what does it really mean for companies who employ people? Firstly, this assumption of homogeneity simply does not hold. Homogeneous means everybody's the same. And if you're thinking like that about your workforce, you're going to find that this idea of the typical employee no longer really exists. There are very few homogeneous workforces. They may look the same at face value, but as we'll learn in lesson 2, once you start thinking broadly about the concept of diversity and really examining all the ways in which people are different, sometimes in subtle ways that you can't see at the surface, you realize that actually workforces are heterogeneous, which means that people are very different from each other. You might think of certain employee groups like factory workers or the soldiers who make up an army as a homogeneous group of employees. They're very much the same. They're similar kinds of people. But the truth is that assumption simply doesn't hold. So it's virtually impossible to cater for a single profile of employee. If you're an organization trying to devise practices or processes to manage your workforce, and you're coming up with those with a singular profile of employee in mind or a typical kind of profile, you're going to find that those assumptions simply aren't good enough. Now diversity is and has to be accepted as a global reality for most organizations. And that affects how they are defining their people management practices. They're thinking about their workforces as heterogeneous. And when they're developing processes and practices to manage their people, they're thinking about people in a diverse way. But this brings complexity. Workforces are becoming increasingly harder to manage because heterogeneity is complex. Diverse workforces are more challenging to harness because you have all sorts of people who have different value sets, different motivational drivers, and different perspectives on the world. And you're trying to put in place the best processes to manage those employees and to get the best performance out of them. But it's difficult because you're no longer dealing with a typical average. This requires greater levels of understanding and depth from organizations and from teams who put those processes in place. New skills and insights are needed, both in the HR space and in the leadership space. If you understand that your workforce is diverse and that the needs to manage that workforce are becoming increasingly complex, you're going to have to dig deeper and come up with more innovative and more sophisticated ways of managing that. And for some organizations, developing sophisticated workforce management practices that really keep pace with the rate in which their workforce is diversifying is becoming increasingly challenging. And that's why diversity management is now a strategic priority for most organizations.